Hi, everybody. Hello. Good evening. First of all, thank you all for coming tonight to talk about a very important topic that's been on the minds of not only our planning department, but our housing department and the town in general. My name is Jed Cornock. I'm the town planner. I'm joined tonight by Kim Fish, our housing coordinator, and the fine folks from Horsley Witten Group and Barrett Planning Group, who are helping us out with updating our 2018 housing production plan. So just to kick us off, as many of you have probably seen the agenda, there's a lot to discuss tonight, so I'm going to be very brief and then just hand the microphone off to Jeff. But before we get started, just want to remind everyone that there are bathrooms outside the exit, just to the right. There are cookies and water over on the side here. And as I mentioned before, if you haven't signed in, please do so before you leave tonight so that we know how many folks came tonight and if there's a way to get in touch with you afterward. And lastly, a big shout out to the school department, a big thank you to them for allowing us to use the venue tonight, and to town staff who have come to help us out with this discussion tonight. So with that, I'm just going to pass the microphone off to Jeff Davis from Horsley Witten Group.
Thank you, Jed. Try to use this thing so I can also use my hands. There we go. Technology's working. Hooray! All right, well, welcome again, everyone. My name is Jeff Davis with the Horsley Witten Group. We're a firm based in Sandwich, where my colleagues who are here tonight are in our Providence office. So just to raise your hands if you are here to help today. I just want to introduce our team. So we've got Alexis here from Barrett Planning Group. We've got Krista from Horsley Witten. We've got Meredith and Tony from the Barrett Planning Group as well. And along with Jed and Kim, we'll be helping facilitate discussions this evening. So we do hope to spend the majority of this evening having small group discussions with each of you. We have a lot of slides and a lot of information, and I will apologize in advance. We're going to try to go through them as quickly as possible so we can spend as much of this evening hearing from you. So I will just dive right in. First, a question, show of hands. I mean, you're all here today because you feel some way about housing, but how many of you would you consider yourselves fairly familiar with what a housing production plan is? Okay, maybe about 20%. Cool. So a little bit of background on housing production plans. So the purpose of these plans is to facilitate development and preservation of homes that meet the requirements of the state's affordable housing law, commonly known as Chapter 40B. So the state has a goal for all municipalities in the Commonwealth to have at least 10% of your year-round housing units deed restricted as affordable to low and moderate income households. So the good news is Falmouth is in a much better place than a lot of its neighbors. As of the end of October, just this last month, you're at 8.11%, which is actually quite good and reflects all the hard work that this community has done on this issue over the years. So these plans must be adopted every 5 years by the Planning Board and the Select Board, and then sent to the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And for those of you who are not familiar, this is what used to be THCD and is now HLC. So, what are the components of a housing production plan? We start with the housing needs assessment. We want to get a sense of what are your demographics, how are they changing, what is your existing housing inventory, what is it like? A projection of what your housing needs might be into the future, any development constraints, things that might get in the way of being able to meet your needs, and also your infrastructure capacity. Next, we go to your housing goals. We want to determine as a community, what is it we're trying to achieve? Obviously, that 10% affordable housing, but also we want to talk about what is the mix of housing types that you might need within the community, and also very specific numerical housing production goals. And then finally, this all builds towards an implementation strategy. So we develop proposed zoning and policy changes, we want to try to identify specific sites where housing might be where affordable housing might be appropriate, and that's one of the things we want to talk with you about tonight. Desired characteristics of development, what it might look like, how it might function, and any regional partnerships. So are there opportunities to partner with other municipalities on the Cape? So when we say affordable housing, what does that mean? We're really talking about units that are eligible for that SHI, the State Housing Inventory. And that is based on a range of numbers. But basically, HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Office in Washington, D.C., has its area median family income. And to be affordable, we're looking at least 80% of that AMI or less. And so you can see in this region, for a family of 4, the 80% area median income is just over $92,000 a year. So these are folks that are making pretty good livings and are still under that threshold for affordability. Whose housing needs are we talking about? Whose housing needs will this address? Again, the primary purpose of the plan is to address that 10% affordable housing on the SHI list, but we're really going to try to look at your housing needs holistically. What is missing? What does the average person need in order to continue to live in this community? So we're looking not only at affordability, but diversity of housing types. And where will future housing go? Really is that last section, the implementation strategies that will guide us, the proposed zoning and policy changes, as well as the site identification, the specific sites where we feel that affordable housing development may be appropriate within Falmouth. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alexis to take us through some of the background information and the feedback that we've received from the community so far.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me? Good? Okay. All right. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm going to be going over kind of a preliminary assessment of where we are with the housing needs in your community. And Jeff mentioned what goes into a housing needs assessment. We look a lot at demographics. We look at your existing housing stock, development trends, things of that nature. And just to kind of get a sense of where are you now and where are you likely to be going, and what sorts of goals and strategies will those needs feed into. So the first thing I want to point out here on your agenda is there's kind of a general project timeline. So that needs assessment, we've actually been working on for a few months in the background, working with town staff, and also conducting some small group interviews. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've heard through those. So that needs assessment, we've kind of broken down into different parts that we've been working on, reviewing existing plans such as the town's current housing production plan, your local comprehensive plan, so on and so forth. And then we've really been, analyzing those housing needs from both just kind of quantitative data, but also the things that we've heard from members of the community. So you can see where it says small group interviews. And so one of the things that we did at the outset of this process was we identified community stakeholders with a knowledge of housing needs in your community. So that included members of land use boards and committees and commissions in your community, service providers, town staff, and then just other organizations and nonprofit developers and so forth. So we could get kind of a taste of, what is going on in Falmouth, what's going on in the region, and what can Falmouth do in relation to the needs that we're identifying. So some of the things that we heard just briefly in those interviews, and we'd love to hear from you tonight if you kind of agree with some of these things that we've heard, if there's things that are missing. But one of the things, the primary things that is not unique to Falmouth is that essentially the trajectory of the housing crisis that has been going on Cape Cod for some time, it has certainly been exacerbated and worsened by the effects of the pandemic. Again, that's not unique to your community. Nationwide, there's an ongoing housing crisis with just the prices of homes becoming increasingly unaffordable. So one of the things that we're seeing more in communities that have kind of a seasonal economy and housing market is that there's kind of this trend that people reported to us of, out-of-towners being able to just come in and buy homes immediately as they go on the market, being able to pay in cash. And so that's just kind of making the existing problem worse. And then there's kind of varying levels of concern about the impact of short-term rentals. We heard a bit about some neighborhoods that have kind of entirely been transformed because of that market. And so the problem where that really relates to the housing production plan is because of that, there's a perceived loss of winter rentals and year-round rentals, where a property owner who maybe was renting out their property year-round, they want to kind of move to that that short-term rental model because it is more lucrative. And so we've heard that people have been, told even after living in their homes for a very long time that now they need to move. And so that has also kind of exacerbated a problem, especially for longer-term renters in your community. We also heard quite a bit about the aging population, which again, not unique to Falmouth, but one of the things that's interesting that we've heard is kind of this this split where, yes, you have, wealthy retirees moving to the community, but we've also heard that there is a marked increased need among seniors who maybe have lower incomes, living alone. We heard from town staff that there's even more homeless or at risk of homeless seniors than ever before, and there's kind of a change in the face of homelessness. And so there's this split among the senior population. We also heard that it's really difficult filling public and private sector jobs. And there are more people traveling from across the bridge. And then kind of the general question is, what are future generations going to look like if these trends continue? So then in terms of kind of the solutions that people raised during these discussions, there's generally a variety of housing types needed to accommodate a range of income levels and lifestyles. So one of the first questions we ask is, whose needs are not being met? And what housing types do you need? And often the answer is, everything. So that is something that we heard quite a bit. We also heard about how some of your current land use regulations may not adequately support the creation of more housing. That there are many properties that are non-conforming, and a question of should your zoning be right-sized. You have a lot of single-family homes on very small lots that no longer conform to your current zoning. And we also heard quite a bit about what might be the most kind of acceptable forms of housing to members of the community. We heard quite a bit about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and also conversion of existing properties and buildings. These are kind of likely to be more accepted. They kind of fit into the natural fabric of the community. We also heard quite a bit about the need for regional collaboration, and that's critical for advancing housing goals, not just for your community, but on Cape Cod. And that a really big challenge is the town, at the staff level, at the board and committee level, they may be, trying to make a lot of effective progress with implementing your previous housing production plan or your LCP, but zoning changes still have to go to town meeting. And so if they don't get passed at town meeting, then all that work, it's not going to advance the goals that you're hoping for. And so one of the things we also heard is that really educating the community is key, educating people about the housing needs and the strategies that could potentially address those challenges. So that's all the things that we've heard, and we definitely want to hear from you tonight what you think is missing from that kind of general broad assessment, and then what you agree with, what you disagree with. And then we kind of get more into the quantitative data, the numbers. So just looking at your population trends over the last 90 years, you can see in the 70s, I feel like this is supposed to have a laser somehow, and I can't figure it out. Anyway, but yeah, so in the 1970s, that was where there was kind of the sharpest increase in population, and through the 80s. But one interesting thing was the population dropped from 2000 to 2010. There were population projections that were built on that decrease that now, are really called to question because the population then actually did go back up for the 2020 census. So looking at those numbers, we really want to understand the breakdown of who is in your community. So we look quite a bit at the age breakdowns. And so the blue columns there, that is your community, Falmouth. And then in the middle, that kind of tannish, it looks a little odd on screen, but that's the county. And then the orange is Massachusetts. And so going across that, axis on the bottom, we have under 5 over here, all the way up to 85 plus. And so one of the interesting things you see that I'm sure is no surprise to you, yes, it is a broad trend that the population is aging, really all over the country, but it is definitely more pronounced on Cape Cod. You can see the percent of the total population that's under 5 is lower on Cape Cod than Massachusetts. In fact, every age cohort is less until you get to the older age cohorts, 55 plus, and then it's a higher share in Falmouth and on Cape Cod. So we then also wanted to look at how has that changed over time, and so if you look at on this side over here, there's the under 18 shift over a 30-year period from census 1990 to census 2020. And so you can see that there has been a significant decrease in population under 18, even nationwide, but more pronounced on Cape Cod. And then conversely, looking at that 65 plus population, a marked increase, more so in Falmouth than the other geographies we are looking at. So what does that mean? Well, one trend that I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about is, so last 20 years looking at student enrollment, it's gone down around 1,500 students, and that's a pretty consistent trajectory. We also took a look at your current household makeup. So yes, we like to look at population, but we also like to look at households. And so, the way, I know that the census is kind of taking a closer look at how they define households and families and things like that, but for now the vocabulary we're kind of stuck with, breaking it down into family households and non-family households. Among family households, there's really not much of a difference between Falmouth and Barnstable County in Massachusetts. But what struck us is in the non-family household types, that can include people living alone or people in kind of a roommate situation where they're unrelated. And so in Falmouth and on Cape Cod, that is higher than the state pretty significantly because you have a lot of seniors living alone. So when we look at that and we break it down, that living alone population, that is a much larger share of that is 65 plus on Cape Cod than in Massachusetts. So when you look at the total households, 65 plus living alone, almost 20% of your households are 65 plus living alone. And so what does that mean for your housing needs looking forward? That's a really big, important question for this plan. So also kind of, in addition to looking at the demographics and households, we want to look at the housing that you have on the ground. So these figures are from the 2020 census. And so in Falmouth, you have almost 23,000 housing units on the ground. As I'm sure, no surprise to you, many of those are not occupied year-round. So if you look at the bottom row, the percent of total housing units identified as for recreational, seasonal, or occasional use in Falmouth is 30%, compared to Massachusetts as a whole at 4%. So that has big implications for what a housing production plan can and cannot do. And that is a pretty long-term trend. We look back at the last 4 censuses, and those percentages really haven't shifted much. Looking at your housing types, so again, the blue is Falmouth, the kind of, well now it looks more gray, Barnstable County, and then the orange is Massachusetts. But so I think, again, probably not a surprise to you, but the share of housing units that are in single-family detached structures is much higher on Cape Cod than Massachusetts as a whole. And so, is that something that you want to diversify or not? So because single-family homes make up so much of your housing stock, we really wanted to look at that and see what's on the ground because it impacts our understanding of development trends. So what you see here, this map shows the ratio of land value to building value. And so for all the green areas, what that indicates is that the land holds the majority of the property value. And then the red areas, the red parcels, the buildings are holding the majority of the property value. And so it kind of makes sense. You see a lot of that green along the waterfront where those land values are so high, but what comes along with that is an increased risk of tear down. Because when someone is buying a property where the land is really where all the value is, and especially if it's an older structure that needs a lot of work, they're more inclined to say, tear it down and build something new. So again, looking at that single-family market trends, this is looking back all the way to 1987. So the blue line is Falmouth, and this is inflation adjusted. So these numbers are based on today's figures. But so the blue is Falmouth, and the gray is the county, and they really kind of closely follow each other. So really, no surprises there. You see that huge increase after COVID. And what was really striking to me looking at this is the orange squares there are the number of sales in Falmouth. And so if you look historically, as the number of sales goes down, the housing prices will also come down. And if you look 2020 onward, that trend is not happening yet. Will it happen? I mean, time will tell, but you can see the number of sales has dropped significantly, but the prices are still going up. So it's still hard for people to be able to move into your community. We looked at the rents as well to get a sense of how difficult that is. And so this is interesting. Your rents actually did not, what we saw in our market analysis, was not hugely high compared to what the state assesses as the fair market rent, which is in the first column there. But if you look at the sample size, so this is based on a market rent survey, very small sample size. This is a 24-month look back, and there's only 11 examples of a one-bedroom, 12 of a two-bedroom, and so on and so forth. So yes, they look good on, well, good, I mean, that's still, I'm sure, much higher than you're probably used to, say, 10 years ago. But the sample size is so small that it shows there's so much competition for those very few units. So with all these housing costs considerations, we want to look at income, and I was really struck by this. So again, the blue is Falmouth here, and the orange is Massachusetts. So on this side, you have your median family income, and this side is median household income. Typically, median family incomes are higher because households will include people who are living alone, and so just by default, the median family income is typically higher. But this is looking across a 10-year period, and Falmouth really isn't that, it's regarded as a wealthier community, but when you look at the actual median incomes, it's really not that out of line with trends across the state. But so with that in mind, we want to look at what's called cost burden, and we're actually looking at, for this table, severe cost burden, which is where households are paying more than 50% of their income toward housing costs. And so this is for owners and renters altogether. And so if you take a look on the side over here, that's broken down by income. So that first row is up to 30% of that area median income, so extremely low incomes. In Falmouth, 60% of those households are paying more than 50% of their income toward housing costs. So in total, 13% of your households are severely cost burdened. And so it's interesting, if we look back at that 10% 40B threshold, that doesn't actually hit the need that you have. And that's typical in all communities. But one thing that I did think was interesting when we broke it down to owners and renters, there's actually a shift in Falmouth compared to the county and the state, where in your extremely low income households, owners are much more likely to be extremely cost burdened, and that resonates with some of the things that we've heard about people who maybe have their, even if their home is paid off or not, but if they're living on a very small, retirement income, but they own their home, they still may be having a very hard time meeting housing costs. But in Falmouth, it's actually lower for owners than it is for the county and the state, but renters, it's a higher share for those extremely low income. So it's interesting to see that shift really occurs looking even just from Falmouth to the county. So with all that said, there's clearly housing need, and there's clearly barriers as well. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff, who's going to talk with us about some of those barriers and considerations for housing development.
Thank you, Alexis. We are already over time, as I knew we would be because we have so many slides today. With your permission, I'm going to go through this very quickly. All these slides will be available on the town's website if you want to go back and look at them in greater detail. But as I said when we started, I want to spend as much time tonight as possible talking to all of you. So I'll go through this very quickly. So really just to let you know that we are aware that the answer isn't as simple as, well, just build more housing, right? There are a lot of legitimate challenges to construction throughout the community, and I want you to know that we're aware of those and taking those into account. A huge one, of course, is sewer service. Only about 11% of properties, built properties, are connected to the sewer system. There is a big issue with nitrogen, including in your coastal ponds, and You've been doing a lot of work as a community on this issue, and it is real. We're aware of the work that the Water Quality Management Committee is doing to find solutions for different ways to treat outfall and to expand your existing water and sewer service. So we're keeping an eye on that. As well as your, of course, standards for denitrification in development and the implementation of your comprehensive wastewater treatment management plan, your CWMP. In terms of zoning, I'll just say two quick things. There are barriers related to zoning, and there are aspects of your zoning that are helping this issue. Of course, most of the community is zoned for large lot, single family, 1 or 2 acres, and there are some really positive aspects of that with the environment. There are negative aspects as well. You also have a number of tools that you're using to help diversify housing. So your mixed residential and commercial overlay district is probably the most notable, where for the first time you are allowing multifamily to occur by right within that overlay district, which makes a huge difference. So I won't go through all of these, but we have analyzed your zoning for all the various ways, all the various tools that you have in your toolkit to create not only affordable housing, but a diversity of housing. I do want to pause for a moment on the accessory apartment bylaw. That's something you've had on the books for a while. It's recently changed. And interestingly, when you removed the requirement for affordability for ADUs, production started going up. And this is one of those examples where there is a bit of a tension between affordability and housing diversity, and sometimes it's more important to get that diversity in, even if you're not necessarily getting units that are counting towards the SHI. You also have a number of tools that have never been used before or haven't been used in decades. And you want to take a closer look at those and see how they might be better utilized and more attractive options. Similar to the issues around sewer and utility capacity, we are very aware of your environmental concerns. A lot of your undeveloped, unprotected land is still very sensitive and not necessarily appropriate for development. You've got a lot of issues related to protection of groundwater and surface water, again, particularly around your coastal ponds. And we also know that the town continues to study whether existing drinking water sources are adequate to meet future demands, which is obviously hugely important. Again, you do have a number of tools in zoning that help protect your environment. You have all these resources in place, and that means that there's less land available for development, which means that what you do have left is more difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to develop, and whether we're talking about affordable housing or anything else. Other significant challenges, obviously, as we've already discussed, property costs and availability. Just availability of subsidy funds. It's very expensive to build affordable housing, or housing of any kind. Your limits on public transportation, and also community perceptions. There are just still a lot of feelings that more housing is a bad thing for the community. And all the challenges are very real. We are not discounting them at all, but they're not insurmountable. We do acknowledge, though, that a lot of the choices that are left are not easy. They require trade-offs and pretty intense discussion among the community. So, with that, it's time to hear from all of you. You've divided yourselves up almost evenly. Thank you very much for doing that naturally. We will have a facilitator at every table. And again, raise your hand if you're a facilitator. Facilitators, please start making your way. Pick a table, any table that you think is going to treat you nice. Please do that facilitator nicely, by the way. And we've got about 45 minutes where we're going to go through a series of 6 questions with you. We'll say, before we break, everyone should have in front of you a worksheet. The facilitator is going to take notes at a high level, but if there's anything very specific that you want to make sure the town is aware of and considering, please write that down on those worksheets and turn them into the signing table before you leave. Thank you so much. microphone, but it's not working for me, so I'm going to use my big voice. It's 5 till 8 o'clock. We want to make sure that we respect your time and also the time of the janitors who are here and locking up after us today when they get home to their families. We want to end with just one big idea from each of the tables, something that was consensus in your group or something that was really troubling or something you want to keep pondering. So I will start with our table in the back. Our big idea was there are a lot of, oh, here we go. Here we go. So there are a lot of existing buildings throughout the community, many of which are already on sewer and water, that have access to a lot of resources within the community, and we should really be focusing on converting a number of those buildings into housing. That was our big idea. All right, pass on to Kristen.
We had a very spirited table, and I thank you all. It was fascinating. We had a great conversation. Big idea is to regulate short-term rentals. We're finding a way to do that. And then also, I'm going to do two because we had two sides at this table. I'm going to squeeze it in. And to have the town to do more, to build capacity for the town to do more, to provide affordable housing to build it. So just more capacity, more resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
So our group talked a lot about diversity in the housing stock and improving that diversity, not only focusing on ADUs and more of them, but focusing on smaller homes and creating more rental properties.
Yeah, likewise, our group also talked a lot about diversifying housing types. Another big topic was expanding the mixed residential and commercial overlay districts, supporting these ideas, and also just building better the overlay district, and then building better sewer infrastructure to support these developments.
Thank you, Tony. Team Alexis.
Thanks. First I have to say you stole ours, which was the
Great.
working
Consensus
with,
is good.
Yes, I know it is. Working with the existing built landscape through things such as accessory dwelling units and converting older homes into fourplexes, things like that. We did have one really interesting idea that I also wanted to bring up, which is looking at kind of the locations of the elementary schools and kind of factoring that in as well to where housing might go. And just inventorying existing town properties and buildings, again, with that idea of looking at what we already have and can work with.
Super, thank you. And last but not least, Team Kim.
Thank you, everyone. I think we could stay here all night talking. It was a great conversation. Thank you. So we did we're thinking about the elementary schools as well. Redistrict them, close one, build on one. But don't quote me on the enterprise on that. It was a team effort. I'm getting it now. Year-round rentals, do some incentives to create more year-round rentals. Water, sewer, etc. We really need to create more year-round rentals in some sort of way, and we're hoping that would do the trick. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we are just about right on time. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. The next public meeting is scheduled for January 10th. We'll almost certainly be here if we can swing it, unless there's some unforeseen conflict, but we'll try to make it back in this room on January 10th. Snow date is a week later, January 17th, because I hear we might get snow this year, which would be awesome. Please be on the lookout for information on the town's website for the electronic version of all the maps that are on the boards tonight, the presentation and so forth. And a reminder, anyone who wrote down anything on a worksheet, please do leave that on the sign-in table before you head out today. Jed or Kim, anything else you want to say before we say goodnight? Take cookies home. Please eat cookies.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We need you, and you showed up, and that's the biggest thing you can do for housing and to help us create more housing and help this crisis is show
yourselves a hand. Thank you, everyone.